I want you to picture me for a second. Not the woman I am now, sitting here with a story to tell and the clarity that comes after the storm passes. I want you to picture the woman I was at 11:23 p.m. on a February night, sitting in a parked car in my own driveway, hands locked around the steering wheel, unable to move. My golden mustard sweater was damp at the collar. I did not remember when I had started crying. The porch light on my senior living studio was flickering the way it always did, the way I had asked the building manager to fix 17 times, and I just sat there watching it blink on and off like a warning signal I had never learned to read. That is where this story begins, not with a door slamming, not with a dramatic confrontation in a restaurant or a screaming match in the kitchen. It begins with a woman who could not bring herself to walk into her own home. But I need you to feel something else first, before I take you back to the beginning. I need you to feel what it was like standing in front of a camera. A real journalist, real lights, real microphone, in that same golden mustard sweater, in that same driveway, saying my husband's name out loud to the entire city of Oakland. I need you to feel the way my voice did not shake. Not because I had prepared, not because I had rehearsed, but because by that morning I had absolutely nothing left to lose, and there is a strange, terrible freedom in that. I said his name. I described what he did. I looked directly into that camera and I thought, you built your reputation on the ruins of mine. Let's see what yours looks like now. Then I blinked, and I was back in the car. November. Oakland in autumn, when the light turns golden in the afternoon and the leaves on the street outside the brick row houses go copper and rust. The working-class neighborhood where I lived had a certain beauty that time of year, the small porches draped in the colors of the season, neighbors you knew by first name, by their dogs' names, by what they cooked on Sunday mornings. It used to feel like community. It used to feel safe. On the passenger seat beside me sat a stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band. $11,400 in overdue notices, utilities, and credit accounts I did not recognize. I had gone through them 3 times that evening at the kitchen table in my studio, the kitchenette light buzzing overhead, trying to make sense of them. I could not. The rubber band was the only thing holding all of it together, and I was sitting in my car in the dark, realizing that the rubber band was also the only thing holding me together. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out my church fan, the one with Martin Luther King's face on it, the one I had carried since my mother gave it to me, and that I kept in every car I ever owned as a kind of talisman. I fanned myself slowly in the cold air. I tried to breathe. 3 months earlier, it had been Valentine's Day. February 14th, 2022. A rare ice storm had hit the Bay Area, the kind that shuts down freeways and makes the local news run footage of cars spinning out on the 880. Marcus had left that morning for what he called a quick errand. By 9:47 p.m., I had called him 62 times. 62. I counted because I could not stop counting, because every unanswered call felt like a stone dropping through the floor of my chest, and counting gave me something to do with my hands while my mind tried to build the story that would explain it. He was stranded. The phone was dead. The roads were impossible. I built that story carefully, brick by brick, the way you build anything you desperately need to survive. I did not know yet about the credit cards. I did not know yet about the whisper campaign he had been running through our church community for the better part of 2 years. I did not know that the man who had come home at 2 a.m. that Valentine's night with ice in his hair and a story about a broken-down highway had been slowly, methodically, building a version of me in other people's minds. An unstable version, an erratic version, a woman who could not hold herself together, so that when everything finally came out, the community around me would already be primed not to believe a word I said. I knew none of that yet. I just knew I was 47 years old and sitting in my own driveway with a rubber band around my life, watching a broken porch light blink on and off. Something felt wrong. I had been telling myself it was my imagination for over a year. But you cannot call someone 62 times on Valentine's Day and still believe your imagination is the problem. I got out of the car, I walked inside, and I had no idea that within 6 months, everything would be destroyed, and then, slowly, rebuilt into something I had never had the courage to dream of before. If someone in your life made you believe your own instincts were the problem, stay with me. Because what comes next is going to feel very, very familiar. Let me tell you about the version of myself I was before all of this, before the bills and the fraud investigator and the 62 unanswered calls. I want you to understand who she was, because what happened to her was a slow process, and slow processes are the hardest to name while you are inside them. I was a woman who played dominoes on Thursday nights at the church fellowship hall with a group of women I had known for years. We laughed loud, we ate. We talked about our grown children and our aching knees and the price of everything going up. I loved those nights. I am not a woman who needs much, but I needed those nights. I gave them up gradually, one Thursday at a time, because Marcus had a way of making my absence feel like abandonment. If I went, he would be quiet when I got home. That particular silence, not angry, just distant, just withdrawn, was a language I had learned to respond to before I even understood I was being trained. I was a woman who fried chicken in a cast-iron skillet every Sunday. I am talking about real chicken, seasoned the night before, the kind that fills the whole apartment with a smell that wraps around you like something your grandmother would recognize. Marcus ate that chicken and praised it and took seconds and thirds and then went into the other room to make phone calls he took in the hallway. I told myself that was normal. I told myself everyone needed privacy. I fried the chicken and I did the dishes and I organized the bills. I was a woman of faith. That church fan with Martin Luther King's face on it was not decoration. I prayed over problems. I believed in endurance. I believed that love required sacrifice. And I believed in the particular dangerous kind of sacrifice that asks you to keep giving without ever asking whether the person you are giving to has any intention of giving back. My faith was real, but faith can be used against you by someone who knows how deeply you believe in it. Marcus knew. He knew because I had told him early on that I believed you stayed, that you worked through things, that leaving was not something you did lightly. He filed that information away. I did not know he was filing it. I thought I was being honest about my values. What I was actually doing was handing him a map of exactly how long he could push before I would walk. The seeds of what he had done were already scattered around me. I just had not connected them yet. The credit card statements had been coming to a different address. He had rented a mailbox at a shipping store. I found one statement by accident, tucked inside a takeout menu on the kitchen counter, and when I asked about it, he looked at me with that particular calm of his and said, "That's the business card, babe. You know I keep that separate." I did not know that. I had not known there was a business card. But the way he said it made me feel like I should have known, like the confusion was mine, like I had simply missed a conversation we must have had. That is the thing about gaslighting that nobody tells you. It does not feel like abuse while it is happening. It feels like your own failing memory. It feels like you are the one who cannot keep track, cannot pay attention, cannot hold things together. And when the man you have organized your entire life around looks at you with patient disappointment, you do not think, "He is manipulating me." You think, "I need to do better." I had sacrificed 11 years. I want you to sit with that number. 11 years of Sundays. 11 years of Thursday nights. I did not go to domino games because his silences taught me not to. 11 years of putting my name on leases and utilities and household accounts because he said his credit was being rebuilt. Give it time. 11 years of financial, social, and emotional labor that built a life that had his name on the good parts and mine on the debts. And I stayed. I stayed because I had convinced myself they needed me. Marcus's mother had health issues. His son from before me needed consistency. If I left, what would happen to the household? Who would manage the bills, organize the care schedule, keep the structure standing? I had made myself so essential to the mechanics of everyone else's life that I had forgotten I was also a person inside my own life. That is a particular kind of disappearing act that women do. We hollow ourselves out in service and call it love and then wonder why we feel empty. You know what I am talking about, don't you? Some of you are nodding right now. Some of you are very, very quiet. The domino nights stopped. The church friendships got thinner. My world got smaller and smaller until the only people I spoke to regularly were people Marcus had introduced me to, people whose understanding of who I was had been shaped largely by what he had told them. And what had he told them? I would not find out until much later. But I was about to get the first clue. In October, a woman from church named Brenda pulled me aside after the service. She had a careful expression. She said, "I just want you to know I always liked you, whatever he said." She squeezed my hand and walked away before I could ask what she meant. I stood there on the church steps in the golden October light, holding my church fan, and I felt the first real fracture in the wall I had built around the truth. Here is what nobody tells you about the moment you stop crying and start thinking. It does not feel like strength. It does not feel like a dramatic shift where the music swells and you straighten your spine and decide to fight. It feels quiet. It feels like something inside you powers down and something else powers up. Something colder. Something that does not need to feel anything right now because it has work to do. I became very organized. I went through every drawer in the apartment, every folder, every envelope, every piece of paper that had ever come through that door. I pulled out the stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band, and I went through them one by one with a legal pad beside me, and I wrote down every account, every number, every address. I found 3 accounts that had never been discussed with me, addresses I did not recognize, minimum payments that had been going unpaid. I matched them against my credit report, which I pulled up for the first time in years on my laptop at the kitchenette table. My credit score was 511. I had started this marriage with a 720. I sat with that number for a long time. Outside, Oakland in autumn was doing the thing it does in late October, the late afternoon light going golden and sideways through the window, the brick row houses across the street casting long shadows across the small porches. It was almost beautiful. Inside, I felt something that had no good name. Not rage yet, not grief anymore. Something colder than both. Something that was simply the experience of having the last excuse removed. I checked everything I could access. I went back through our shared bank statements for 18 months, and I made a list of withdrawals I could not account for. I asked Marcus's workplace to confirm his December schedule from the previous year, citing an insurance form, and learned he had taken 4 consecutive days off that he had told me were mandatory training. I am not a detective. I am a 47-year-old woman from Oakland with a legal pad and a library card and a very particular kind of fury that had nowhere left to go except into documentation. Then in March, the call came. The bank fraud investigator's name was Carla, and she had a voice that was professional and kind in the specific way of someone who had made calls like this many times before. She said there had been flagged activity on accounts opened in my name. She said the signatures were close, but not matching. She said she needed to verify that I had authorized these accounts. When I said no, there was a pause, and then she said, very carefully, "I'm going to need you to come in." I brought the rubber band stack with me. Carla spread the documents on her desk and added the bank's documents to mine, and the picture that emerged was something I had not been prepared for, even though some part of me had already begun to understand what I would find. 3 credit cards, $34,000 in charges, opened over 18 months, none of which I had signed for. The signatures were mine the way a photocopy is the original, close enough to confuse, not close enough to hold. I drove home and I sat in the parking lot of my building for a long time. Do you know what I kept coming back to? Not the money? Not yet. I kept coming back to the Thursday nights. I kept thinking about all the domino games I had missed, all the chicken I had fried, all the church services where I had sat beside a man who was watching me with one eye while managing his escape route with the other. I kept thinking about the rubber band, the stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band that I had been treating as a personal failure, as evidence of my own inadequacy, when the whole time they were evidence of his. That rubber band had been the most honest thing in my life for a year, and I had blamed myself for it. Now I held it in my hands differently. It was not a symbol of my failure. It was documentation. I had given Marcus a key to my financial life because I believed in partnership, because I was trying to keep a household together, because I was convinced that my leaving would cause a collapse that would be my fault. I had sacrificed my credit score, my savings, my social connections, and my own sanity to preserve a structure that had been hollow from the inside for years. He had built a debt in my name while simultaneously building a case with our community that I was too unstable to manage money. The cruelty of that, the architecture of it, the careful, deliberate design. I felt it land in my body all at once, somewhere between my sternum and my throat, a pressure that did not release. I made one decision in that parking lot. I was going to give him one chance to tell me the truth himself. I already knew what he would say. Something in me had already said goodbye. But I needed to hear it. I needed to hear him lie to my face one final time, so that the last excuse I was still somehow constructing would be removed completely. I went inside. I put the bank documents on the kitchen table. I called him in. And I waited. He sat down across from me, and he looked at the documents on the table, and he looked at me, and he said, "You must have forgotten you opened those." That was it. Not denial, not remorse, not even a particularly convincing story. Just a casual reframing of reality. "You must have forgotten." Delivered in the same voice he used to tell me the chicken needed more salt. Patient, almost gentle. The voice of a man who had said things like this so many times that it no longer required any real effort. I looked at my husband, and I understood, completely and finally, that I was looking at someone who had never once been afraid of me finding out. He had never been afraid because he had spent 2 years making sure that by the time I found out, no one would believe me. That sentence, delivered with a calm that required practice, was the moment something in me closed permanently. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I picked up the documents, put them back in the folder, stood up and said, "Okay. Just that. Okay." And I went into the bathroom, and I sat on the edge of the tub, and I held the folder in my lap, and I breathed until my hands stopped trembling. And then I called the number Carla had written on the back of her card. The number for Patricia Ames. Patricia Ames had a small office on Telegraph Avenue, the kind of office with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a desk buried under organized chaos, and a potted plant that had somehow survived years of legal work without sunlight. She was 60 years old, with reading glasses on a chain and a manner of speaking that was precise in the way of someone who has learned that words have legal weight and chooses them accordingly. The bank fraud investigator had slipped her card into my hand at the end of our meeting and said quietly, "Call her. She handles this specific kind of situation." I sat in that office in my golden mustard sweater, and I spread everything on her desk: the rubber band stack, the bank documents, my legal pad, the list of withdrawals, the verified absence records from Marcus's workplace. I talked for 40 minutes without stopping. Patricia listened. She took notes. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she looked up from her legal pad, and she said something that changed the architecture of my fear entirely. "You have more here than you think." I had been prepared for her to tell me it was complicated. I had been prepared for her to explain the challenges of proving financial fraud in a marital context, to outline the difficulties, to manage my expectations downward. I had been talking myself into accepting a smaller version of justice for months without even realizing it, the way women who have been gaslit learn to preemptively reduce their own claims. Patricia did not reduce anything. She picked up each document and examined it with the focused attention of someone building something. She said the forged signatures alone were enough to open a fraud investigation. She said the pattern of debt accumulation tied to the simultaneous reputational campaign he had been running was a form of financial abuse that courts had been increasingly willing to take seriously. She said, This did not happen to you by accident. This was constructed. That word, constructed. It sat in the room between us, and I let it. She was the first person outside my own head to name what had been done to me as something that had been deliberately made. Not a misunderstanding. Not a difficult marriage. Not the kind of situation where both people bear equal responsibility for a mutual failure. Something that had been constructed by one person using the other person's trust as the primary building material. I want you to understand what it means to have someone outside yourself finally see the thing you have been seeing and call it by its real name. It does not feel triumphant in that moment. It feels like crying in a way you have not cried yet. A deeper kind of cry. The kind that comes when the isolation finally breaks and you realize you were not crazy, and you were not weak, and you were not a woman who could not hold things together. You were a woman who had been surrounded by a story about yourself that someone else had written, and the story was a lie, and you had been living inside it for 2 years. And the first person to read the actual documents had said, clearly and without hesitation, "This did not happen to you by accident." I cried in Patricia Ames's office on Telegraph Avenue in the good way. I stopped thinking emotionally and started thinking strategically for the first time in longer than I could remember. I had been trying to manage a marriage. Now I was building a case. Patricia said she needed 2 weeks to pull complete records. She said I should not confront Marcus again, should not move money, should not change behavior in any way that would signal what I was doing. She said, "Act normal. Can you do that?" I thought about 11 years of Sundays. I thought about the particular smile I had learned to put on at church events while something cold moved underneath. "Yes," I said, "I've had a lot of practice." Pretending everything is normal when you are building a legal case against the person you live with is one of the more demanding performances a woman can be asked to give. I want you to understand the specific texture of those 2 weeks. I fried chicken on Sunday. I smiled at the right moments. I went to church and held my fan with Martin Luther King's face on it and mouthed the hymns and nodded during the sermon and shook hands in the parking lot. I had coffee with a neighbor named Denise, who had been one of the people in Marcus's orbit, and I listened to her talk about her grandchildren, and I said all the right things, and I drove home and sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes, just breathing before I could go inside. Marcus was, if anything, more relaxed than usual during those 2 weeks. That told me something. A man who believes he has neutralized a threat relaxes. He cooked dinner twice, which he had not done in months. He complimented my sweater. He asked about my week. I watched him perform normalcy with professional ease, and I thought about all the years I had believed that performance was real, and I felt something that I can only describe as grief for the version of myself who had not known better. But I was not that version anymore. Patricia called me at the end of week 1 to confirm that the civil fraud filing was ready to proceed. She had pulled every record, every transaction, every forged signature. She had documentation showing the pattern across 18 months. She said the civil judgment potential was the full $34,000 plus legal fees. She also said she had been in contact with the district attorney's office and that the criminal fraud component was strong enough to refer for review. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the library, where I had taken all my calls from Patricia to keep them off the home network, and I listened to all of this and I said, "When do we file?" She said, "This week. Are you ready?" I thought about Brenda at church, squeezing my hand on the steps, saying whatever he said. I thought about the 511 credit score. I thought about 62 unanswered calls on Valentine's Day in an ice storm. I thought about 11 years of Thursday nights I did not go to domino games because a man's silence was louder than my own needs. "I have been ready," I said, "for a long time." On Thursday of that week, I went to a branch of a bank I had never used before, one on the other side of town, and I opened a new bank account in only my name. The woman at the desk was young, maybe 25, and she processed the account with cheerful efficiency, and she did not know she was watching a woman take back something fundamental. I sat in that chair with my ID and my documents, and I signed my own signature on my own account, and I felt something shift in my chest like a door swinging open on a room that had been sealed for years. My name, my account, my money. The most basic possible act of financial autonomy, and it felt like the biggest thing I had done in a decade. I drove home with the new account card in my wallet, and for the first time in months, the weight of the rubber band stack felt like it had transferred somewhere. Not gone, not resolved, but no longer entirely mine to carry alone. That same night, I almost got caught. Patricia had told me to photograph every document before our meeting the following morning. I was at the kitchen table at 11 p.m., documents spread out, phone camera aimed at the pile, when I heard Marcus's key in the door. He was supposed to be at his Thursday night church meeting for another 2 hours. I swept the documents back into the folder, shoved the folder into my tote bag, and had my phone sitting face down and my hands around a glass of water by the time he cleared the doorway. He looked at me. I looked at him. "You're up late," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I said. He went to the refrigerator, poured himself a glass of juice, and went to the bedroom without another word. I sat at that table for 10 minutes after his door closed, hand flat on my chest, feeling my own heartbeat. When it slowed down to something manageable, I picked up the folder, went to the bathroom, locked the door, and finished photographing every document with the fan running for cover noise. No one was going to stop this, not even a close call. Patricia was building something solid. I was done being small. The question now was not whether this would happen, but where and when, and in front of how many people. The civil filing became public record on the first Friday of November. That is how it works. When you file a civil fraud complaint in Alameda County, it enters the public record. It has a case number. It has names. Anyone who knows to look can find it. Patricia had explained this to me in advance, and I had nodded and understood and had still not fully registered what it meant until she said, "Local court reporters pull public records every week. Some of this may get picked up." I went home that Friday and I sat in my driveway in the dark. The same driveway, the same parking spot, and I held the church fan in my hands. The porch light was still flickering. Marcus was inside, not yet knowing what had been set in motion. The autumn air had turned cold enough that I could see my breath, and the leaves on the big oak at the corner of the block had gone from copper to dry brown, rattling on the branches in the wind. Patricia had also filed the formal complaint with the district attorney's office that morning. Marcus would receive notification by mail within 10 business days. She had counseled me to make arrangements before then, practical, immediate arrangements about my living situation, my finances, my safety. I had already done most of them. The new bank account was active. I had transferred the direct deposit from my job. I had moved the documents I needed to keep to a storage unit whose address Marcus did not have. I want to tell you about his car, the BMW 7 Series in sleek silver that he had been making payments on for 2 years, payments that I now understood had been funded at least partially by the fraudulent credit accounts. Every Sunday morning, that car sat in the church parking lot like a statement. Every Sunday, I watched people in our congregation run their eyes over it with that particular mix of admiration and envy that comes with status objects. Marcus took care of that car the way he did not take care of much else. He washed it himself in the driveway. He kept a specific cloth in the trunk for buffing the chrome. That car was his most visible proof that he was a man of means, a man who had built something, a man whose wife's claims about him should perhaps be considered alongside the evidence of that car. I thought about that car a lot during those weeks. I thought about what it was made of, underneath the silver paint and the buffed chrome, what it actually represented in terms of dollars, of debt, of who had really paid for the illusion. The legal trap was fully set. Patricia had the civil filing. The DA had the criminal referral. The documents were photographed, backed up, filed. My finances were separated. My account was open. My name, my money, my future, beginning to be just mine again. The thing about traps, though, is that they require patience. The trap was set. Now I had to wait for the right moment, the right door, the right person walking through it. That person turned out to be a journalist named Elise Carter from a local outlet that covered community finance and domestic economic issues. She called Patricia's office on a Monday. She had pulled the public filing over the weekend. She said she was writing a piece on financial abuse in domestic partnerships in the East Bay. She asked if the plaintiff would be willing to speak on record. Patricia called me immediately after. She said, "This is your choice. You do not have to do this." I thought about Brenda on the church steps. I thought about the 23 women in 23 driveways. I thought about the version of me that had been built in other people's minds by a man who needed me to be unstable so he could steal from me and walk away clean. "Tell her yes," I said. The interview was scheduled for that Thursday morning, the same day I used to play dominoes with my friends. I thought that was fitting. Elise Carter showed up with a small camera crew, just 2 people, and a recorder. She was professional and calm, and had clearly done her research because she arrived with questions that went beyond the fraud charges into the broader pattern, the isolation, the reputation management, the deliberate erosion of my credibility with the community around me. We sat in my driveway. I had chosen the driveway specifically, deliberately, because that parking spot was the place where this had all lived in my body for months. The place where I had sat, unable to go inside. I wanted to transform it. I wanted to look at a camera in the same spot where I had once been paralyzed and say every single thing I had not been allowed to say out loud. I wore the golden mustard sweater that reminds me of autumn. The November light was low and sideways and golden, exactly the way Oakland light gets in the fall, and I sat in a folding chair in my driveway with the brick row houses behind me and the oak tree at the corner rattling its last dry leaves, and I looked at Elise Carter and I said, "His name is Marcus, and what he did was not a mistake. It was a plan." You know that feeling when you have been holding something very heavy for so long that you have forgotten you are holding it, and then you set it down? That is what saying his name felt like. Public, out loud, on the record, his name. Elise asked me about the 62 calls. I told her. I told her about Valentine's Day and the ice storm and the way I had built excuses in my head for each unanswered call, careful, deliberate excuses, because the truth was too large to look at directly. I told her about the rubber band stack and what it felt like to learn that the debt had been constructed in my name while the story being told about me to our community was that I could not manage money. He built the crime and he built the alibi simultaneously, I said. And the alibi was me, my reputation. The idea that I was too scattered, too emotional, too unstable to be believed. He needed people to think that before they found out what he had done, so that when they found out, their first instinct would be doubt. Elise said, "And how did that feel? To understand that?" I looked at the camera for a moment before I answered. "It felt like the most expensive thing anyone had ever stolen from me," I said. "Not the $34,000. The $34,000 is money. Money can be recovered. What he stole was the trust of the people around me and my own belief in my perception of reality. You cannot put a number on that." That line went into the article. It went into the online version. It was shared 312 times in the first 48 hours. The piece ran that Saturday. By Sunday morning, the church was already doing what communities do when something undeniable is placed in front of them. The men's ministry had a meeting. Marcus's name came up. By the following week, the invitation to lead the Bible study he had been doing for 4 years was quietly, pointedly, not renewed. His mother, who had defended him for longer than I care to think about, called me on a Tuesday and said she was sorry. She said she had not wanted to see it. She said she was asking him to remove his belongings from her property. He lost the apartment he had rented on one of the fraudulent cards when that card's debt was traced and the civil judgment moved toward execution. He lost the silver BMW because the payments on it were connected to one of the same accounts. The car sat in an impound lot for 11 days before it was repossessed, and I only know that because a neighbor who had once believed his version of me called to tell me, the way neighbors do, because the story had reversed itself in the community, and now there was a different version of Marcus being told. I felt nothing when I heard about the car. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Just the quiet of indifference, which is its own kind of justice. "You cannot borrow a reputation," I said to the camera that Thursday morning. "You can only destroy one. And when the truth finally comes out, you find out the reputation you destroyed was the foundation everything was built on, including yours." The civil judgment was finalized 6 weeks after the article ran. $34,000, legal fees, a formal finding of financial fraud in a domestic partnership, part of the public record. Patricia called me when it came through. She said, "Congratulations." I was sitting in the parking lot of the library out of habit. I looked at the oak trees through the windshield, November gold, and I thought about all the women sitting in parking lots and driveways, holding things they do not know how to put down. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing it." By December, the leaves were gone from the oak tree at the corner. The brick row houses on my street looked different without the autumn color, smaller somehow, and more honest. The neighborhood I had once thought of as community had given me a complicated lesson in what community actually means. Not the performance of togetherness, not the shared performance of respectability, but the willingness to look at hard things and name them correctly even when it costs you the story you preferred. Some of my neighbors had done that. Some had not. I had stopped needing them to. The civil judgment had been entered. Marcus had 30 days to respond, and when he could not, the execution of judgment began. The accounts were traced. The debts were assigned. The $34,000 that had been taken in my name became, legally and officially, his to repay. My credit report had a formal notation of identity fraud. The 511 score began, slowly, to climb back toward something that resembled who I had actually been before all of this. Patricia and I met for coffee in January. She had another client to get to, but she sat with me for an hour at a corner table and we talked, not about the case, but about what came next. She said she saw this more often than most people knew. She said, "Women come in holding rubber bands, holding everything together with one small thing, and they think the problem is the rubber band." I thought about the stack of bills. I thought about the night I had sat at the kitchen table unable to make sense of the accounts, blaming myself for the chaos that someone else had deliberately created. The rubber band stack was gone now, not because the debt was gone, some of it was still in process, but because it had been named, and named things lose their power to terrify you in the dark. I had filed the documents. I had opened the account. I had said his name on camera. The rubber band had served its purpose, and I let it go. Marcus reached out once in January through a mutual acquaintance. The message was that he wanted to talk. I did not respond. There was nothing he could say to me that needed to be said, and there was nothing I needed to hear from him to feel whole. My peace did not require his apology. My life did not require his participation in understanding it. That particular indifference, clean, complete, requiring no maintenance, was the truest form of freedom I had found in this entire process. I started volunteering in February with a financial abuse resource network based in the East Bay. They worked with women who were where I had been, sitting in driveways, holding bills, telling themselves it was their own fault. I sat across tables from these women, and I recognized every version of the face they were wearing. The one that was trying to look composed. The one that still held some small hope that the explanation was innocent. The one that already knew the truth and was just waiting for someone outside herself to confirm it was real. "You are not imagining it," I would tell them. The pattern is already visible. You just have to be willing to see it. Patricia's office connected me with 2 other attorneys who worked in this space, and we began building a small referral network. If a woman came into the financial fraud unit of a bank, she could be connected to an attorney and then to our resource group. The pathway was simple. The need was enormous. The church fan with Martin Luther King's face on it is still in my car. It moved from the old car to a used Honda I bought in my name, cash from the judgment proceeds. When I hold it, it does not remind me of the driveways and the flickering porch light and the 62 unanswered calls. It reminds me of my mother's hands. It reminds me of the Sunday mornings that were real, the ones that existed before I handed a man a map of my values and watched him use it against me. Some things belong to you before they belong to the story. The fan belongs to me. I am still in Oakland for now. The senior living studio with the kitchenette and the shared hallway and the porch light that the building manager still has not fixed. But there is a quiet town I have been thinking about, a place where nobody knows my history, where I can walk into a diner and be a woman who is simply there, not the woman from the article, not the woman Marcus built a false version of, not the woman who called her husband 62 times on Valentine's Day, just a woman, with her own bank account and her own car and her own mornings. I am saving for the BMW 7 Series in sleek silver, the real one. The one with my name on the loan, my name on the insurance, my name on everything. I want to park it in the driveway of that house in that quiet town and sit in the driver's seat for a moment before I go inside. Not because I am afraid to go in, but because I want to feel it, the specific texture of having arrived somewhere entirely on your own terms. That day is coming. I can feel it the way you feel a season changing, before the leaves actually turn. It is spring in Oakland now. The light is different in spring than it is in autumn, less golden, more direct, the kind of light that does not flatter anything but illuminates everything. The oak tree at the corner of my block has leafed out again, green and full, and the small porches on the brick row houses have people on them in the evenings in a way they do not in winter. The neighborhood looks like itself again. I look like myself again too. Or maybe I look like myself for the first time. I am 47 years old, and I understand my own life more clearly than I did at 35 or 40 or 45. All the years I was inside the story Marcus was building around me. There is something clarifying about coming through a thing like this. Not in a motivational poster way, in a bone-deep, permanent, structural way. You learn what you are made of, not when things are good, but when everything falls apart, when someone has systematically dismantled your credibility and your finances and your social world, and you are sitting in a driveway at midnight holding a rubber band and a church fan, and you have to decide whether you are going to believe the story they wrote about you or the evidence you can hold in your own hands. I chose the evidence. Thursday nights, I play dominoes again. The group from church took me back without ceremony, the way real friendships do. Not with a lot of discussion about what happened, just with a chair pulled out and a hand dealt and someone sliding me a plate of food and saying, "We missed you." That normalcy, that undramatic return to a simple pleasure I had surrendered without realizing it was a surrender, mattered to me more than the civil judgment, more than the article, more than the BMW dream. The small things you are allowed to have back, those are the ones that tell you the truth about what was actually taken. The advocacy work has grown. I meet with women now through 2 separate organizations in Alameda County. I sit across tables from women holding their own rubber band stacks, and I say the same things Patricia said to me with the same intention. I see this. This did not happen by accident. You have more here than you think. I want to use this part of our time together to talk about what I know now, and what I wish someone had told me before the 62 calls and the 511 credit score and the years of Thursday nights I gave away. Because if any part of this story sounds familiar, and I believe that for some of you it will, I want you to have language for what is happening before it reaches the point mine did. The warning signs are specific and they are visible if you know what to look for. Isolation is the first tool. When someone in your life begins creating friction around your independent relationships, your friends, your church community, your Thursday night domino games, and the friction is subtle enough that it looks like their need for your attention rather than deliberate control, pay attention. Isolation is not always loud. Sometimes it is a silence that teaches you to stay home. Your name on accounts you did not open is not an administrative error. It is an action. One account could be a mistake. 3 accounts over 18 months is a system. If you are in a relationship and you have not personally reviewed your own credit report in the last 12 months, I am asking you to do that this week. The slow erosion of your credibility with the people around you, the whisper campaign, the comments about your stability, the story being told about you in rooms you are not in. This is a specific tactic used to preemptively neutralize your testimony. When the truth comes out, the audience has already been prepared to doubt you. If people in your life have started treating you with a careful, slightly pitying distance that you cannot account for, someone may be managing the narrative. These patterns have names: financial abuse, coercive control, reputational manipulation. They are well documented, they are common, and they frequently go unaddressed because the women living inside them have been positioned very deliberately as the least credible reporters of their own experience. Scientific studies prove that having 4 or more traumas increases the risk of alcoholism 4 to 12 times. Financial abuse is a trauma. Reputational destruction is a trauma. Years of unrecognized sacrifice and coercive isolation are each a trauma. The clinical weight of staying in these situations does not stay contained to the relationship. It moves into your body and your health and your future in ways that compound. And studies in New York show that for every known case of domestic financial abuse, 23 cases remain hidden. 23 women in 23 driveways, 23 rubber band stacks, 23 women fanning themselves with whatever they have in the glove compartment, trying to breathe, telling themselves it must be their fault because the man they trusted looks at them with calm, patient eyes and says, "You must have forgotten." You did not forget. The pattern is already visible. You just have to be willing to see it, and then you have to be willing to find your Patricia Ames. Mine saved my financial life, but what she really did was hand me back the authority over my own story. That is what the right ally does. They do not rescue you. They confirm what you already know and stand beside you while you act on it. I am still in the senior living studio with the kitchenette and the flickering porch light. I am still saving. The quiet town is still ahead of me, patient and real, waiting for the day I am ready to arrive. When I get there, I will park that silver car in that driveway and I will sit in it for 1 good minute before I go inside. Not because I cannot go in, because I want to feel every inch of what I earned. And now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where this reaches. If any part of this story lived inside you, if you recognize something in the rubber band or the dominoes or the 62 calls, I want to know. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. Tell me where you are in your own story. I read everyone. If this reached you today, if it said something you needed to hear, please like this video. It costs you nothing, and it means everything for getting this story in front of the woman who needs it next. And if you are new here, subscribe, because we are not done. There are more stories like this one, and every single one of them ends with a woman sitting in a driveway and then deciding to go inside on her own terms. I called him 62 times in a blizzard. I never call him anything now. And that silence, that clean and deliberate silence, is the best sound I have ever heard.